The governing body issued a private legality confirmation to Mercedes. They simultaneously orchestrated a unanimous mid-season rule change with all 5 manufacturers. This contradictory sequence reveals the true nature of the advantage. Andrea Kimi Antonelli has leveraged it to build a 50-point championship lead. Tension exists between official compliance and universal suspicion. The FIA statement confirms significant effort was invested in compromise. Paddock consensus believes the original interpretation allowed an impossible performance delta. We know Antonelli holds 219 points at the summer break. He secured 6 wins including Monaco and Belgium. We do not know how much dominance stems from driver talent. A thermal engineering masterclass may have operated in the shadows. Competition finally forced this advantage into the light. Rivals pushed hard for answers. Secrets were tested under pressure. Legality was officially confirmed by regulators. Yet the doubt persists across the grid. The resolution was prospective rather than punitive. Performance gains were effectively grandfathered into championship standings. The regulatory fix only applies from June 1, 2026 onward. Estimates place the horsepower advantage between 10 and 13 horses. Specific conditions could make that advantage even larger. Refusing retroactive sanctions creates a lingering competitive question. Did the sport prioritize stability over purity? Teams playing by literal cold measurement rules won the battle. The rest of the grid fights under new terms now. So where does that leave the title fight today? Article C5.4.3 of the 2026 technical regulations set a maximum geometric compression ratio of exactly 16. 0 for any cylinder. That number was absolute on paper. It was also measured exclusively at ambient temperature during initial scrutineering. Rivals quickly identified a critical gap in that enforcement protocol. They suspected Mercedes utilized internal engine materials specifically engineered to expand significantly under extreme heat. This thermal expansion would allow a meaningfully higher effective compression ratio once the power unit reached full operating temperature. Some estimates placed that hot running ratio as high as approaching 18,001. The engine would be perfectly legal when cold. It would become non-compliant only when generating peak power on track. MotorBiscuit famously dubbed this concept the 180°C loophole. That specific temperature became the flashpoint for an entire season of distrust. Engineers across the grid ran their own simulations. They could not replicate Mercedes' straight-line efficiency without breaking the written rules. The math simply did not add up for everyone else. Something had to give. Was it genius or exploitation? The distinction matters deeply in a championship fight. Honda, Ferrari, and Audi reportedly filed formal challenges against the design. They demanded the FIA look beyond the cold inspection bay. The allegation was never about cheating in the traditional sense. It was about interpreting a new regulation in a way nobody else anticipated. The 2026 power unit formula introduced a much bigger electrical component than previous generations. Every manufacturer started with a completely fresh design sheet. Precedent for enforcement was virtually non-existent. Cold measurement had been standard practice for decades. Nobody had explicitly banned hot measurement because nobody had exploited thermal dynamics like this before. Material science met regulatory ambiguity. The result was a performance delta that rivals could see but could not prove through existing channels. They knew what they were seeing on the timing screens. They just could not get the governing body to measure it the same way they were measuring it themselves. Trust evaporated in real time. Suspicion filled the vacuum left by outdated testing protocols. The grid fractured along lines of interpretation rather than outright illegality. Mercedes had found a space between what was written and what was intended. Everyone else was left arguing over semantics while points accumulated elsewhere. The loophole was not a hidden part. It was the operating principle itself. Heat became the variable that redefined compliance. Ambient inspections became theater. Real validation happened at temperatures that original regulators never bothered to check. That oversight created the exact conditions for this controversy to flourish. Innovation outpaced bureaucracy once again. The question was no longer if Mercedes had an advantage. The question was whether that advantage existed inside or outside the spirit of the new era. Rivals believed they knew the answer. Getting official confirmation proved far more complicated than identifying the problem. The governing body responded to that mounting pressure with unprecedented secrecy. Officials conducted undisclosed compression checks on the Mercedes power unit at full operating temperature. These tests were not announced to the media. They were not listed on any public scrutineering schedule. Rival manufacturers had forced the issue behind closed doors, demanding validation that went beyond the standard cold inspection bay. The FIA obliged, but only in private. When those hot temperature measurements were finally completed, regulators delivered a verdict directly to Brackley. The engine was deemed legal under the regulations as they stood at the time of testing. No infringement notice was issued. No technical directive was published immediately following the assessment. The private clearance confirmed that Mercedes had not violated the literal text of Article C5.3, even when measured at the controversial 130°C threshold. This created an immediate paradox for the rest of the grid. How could a design be universally suspected yet officially sanctioned? The answer lay in the gap between regulatory intent and regulatory wording. The FIA had validated compliance, not fairness. Teams like Honda and Ferrari received confirmation that their rivals' advantage existed within the current framework. They were told, effectively, that their suspicions were technically irrelevant under existing rules. Silence followed that private communication. Nobody leaked the exact test data. No official statement explained the methodology used during those secret hot checks. The paddock was left to interpret a non-penalty as either vindication or institutional failure. Trust in the enforcement process eroded further. If the rules allowed this, then the rules themselves were broken. The private legality finding did not resolve the competitive imbalance. It merely relocated the battleground from the garage to the rulebook committee room. Rivals now understood that winning the technical argument required changing the law, not just enforcing it. The secret tests proved that Mercedes had mastered the current regulation set perfectly. Perfection, in this case, looked exactly like exploitation to everyone else. So what happens when legality fails to satisfy competition? You rewrite the definition of compliance itself. That is precisely what happened next. The unanimous vote was not about punishment, it was about closing a door that should never have been opened. Forward-looking changes replaced retroactive justice. Championship points remained untouched. The table stayed frozen in its disputed state. Future seasons would operate under stricter thermal scrutiny. But the 2026 title fight continued under the shadow of that private clearance. Everyone knew the score. Nobody could change it mid-race. The secret verdict became the foundation for everything that followed. Acceptance came reluctantly. Adaptation came immediately. Here is the thing. Imagine spending millions developing a car for a specific rulebook, only to have that rulebook rewritten halfway through the season because your interpretation was too effective. That is exactly the position Mercedes found themselves in after the private legality finding failed to pacify the grid. The FIA statement released via ESPN confirmed that a significant effort had been invested in finding a solution to the topic of the compression ratio. This was not a unilateral mandate handed down from Paris. It was a negotiated settlement ratified by an electronic vote. All 5 power unit manufacturers approved the change unanimously, according to reporting from the Judge 13, COM. The compromise determined that compression ratio would be controlled in both hot and cold conditions from June 1, 2026. From 2027 onwards, measurement will shift exclusively to operating conditions at 1000 read-EDCs. This dual measurement regime effectively neutralized any thermal expansion advantage without declaring the original design illegal. No results were stripped, no points were deducted. The Constructors' Championship standings remained exactly as they were before the vote. This forward-looking resolution prioritized future parity over past punishment. Rivals accepted it because it stops the bleeding immediately. Mercedes accepted it because their existing points haul was protected. The unanimous approval suggests every manufacturer saw value in closing the loophole rather than litigating its history. But does unanimity equal satisfaction? Not necessarily. It simply means everyone preferred a known future to an uncertain legal battle. The mid-season rule change became the definitive end of the technical dispute. Yet it also cemented the suspicion that something valuable had been surrendered voluntarily. Why agree to new constraints if the old ones were truly fair? The answer lies in the collective exhaustion of constant protest. Teams wanted certainty more than vindication. They got it on June 1st. What they lost was the ability to claim moral victory. The regulation now matches the intent. The gap between written law and competitive reality has narrowed significantly. Future development cycles will operate under tighter thermal boundaries. Innovation will continue, but within a smaller box. The 2026 season serves as a transitional year where 2 different regulatory philosophies coexist. Pre-June cars operated under ambient-only scrutiny. Post-June cars face dual validation. That split creates a unique historical artifact in the record books. Championship positions reflect performance across 2 distinct technical eras. Nobody can untangle them now. The compromise stands as the final word on compliance. Suspicion remains the final word on context. Remember how this all started. The governing body issued a private legality confirmation to Mercedes while simultaneously orchestrating a unanimous mid-season rule change. That exact contradiction is why media coverage fractured so dramatically around the alleged 10 to 13 horsepower advantage. Motor Biscuit framed the entire episode as clever engineering, publishing a piece titled The 180°cc Loophole that treated the thermal expansion concept as a legitimate mastery of material science rather than outright cheating. Their analysis aligned perfectly with the FIA's own private legality finding, suggesting that exploiting regulatory ambiguity is simply part of elite motorsport development. GP fans took the opposite stance entirely. They published an article explicitly centered on evidence that disproves the compression ratio allegations, rejecting the loophole narrative as speculative and unproven. This was not a minor difference in tone. It was a fundamental disagreement over whether the advantage even existed in the form rivals claimed. Specialist outlets could not agree on basic facts because the FIA never officially quantified the performance benefit. The 10 to 13 horsepower figure remained a rival estimate throughout, never validated by regulatory testing data. Some reports suggested the delta could be larger under specific conditions, but again, no official source confirmed those higher numbers. The media divide reflected the paddock's own uncertainty. Without hard data from the secret hot temperature checks, journalists were left interpreting silence and compromise as either proof or exoneration. Clever engineering and baseless conspiracy became equally defensible positions depending on which outlet you trusted. The truth likely sits somewhere between those extremes, obscured by the very unanimity that ended the dispute. Nobody won the information war. Everyone just agreed to stop fighting it publicly. The unresolved editorial split persists because the regulatory resolution was deliberately vague about past performance. Future measurement protocols are clear. Historical advantage remains permanently ambiguous. That ambiguity is the real legacy of the 2026 compression controversy. Andrea Kimi Antonelli turned that technical ambiguity into 6 victories before the summer break. He won in China, Japan, Miami, Canada, Monaco, and Belgium during the season's first 12 rounds. The teenager reached the midpoint with 219 points, holding a 50-point lead over Lewis Hamilton and a 59-point margin over teammate George Russell. This makes him the youngest driver to ever lead an F1 World Championship standings, achieved in just his second full season after a mid-season slump during his rookie year. Antonelli himself admitted he did not expect to be leading the championship this season, yet his results have made the youngest ever title a genuine possibility if this form holds to the remaining races.